I'm here today for a lot of reasons, but the most important one is to praise the guppy. There shouldn't be that much to praise about a guppy. It's an insubstantial thing, barely 2 inches long, weighing less than 1/10 of an ounce, little more than a tablespoon of organic chemistry. A guppy is born, swims around for a couple of years, and then dies, returning to that fundamental tablespoon. Compare that to the grandeur of a star. A star is vast, powerful, and by comparison to our short lives, practically eternal. It radiates its power out across the galaxy, burning for perhaps 15 billion years. And when the largest stars collapse and explode in the end of their lives in the violence of a supernova, they shake the very fabric of space-time. And yet, so what? A star is in fact entirely unremarkable. A 3-layer ball of gas that knows exactly one trick, how to fuse hydrogen into helium, and whose grand final act is blowing itself up. Compare that to the guppy. The guppy is a thing of elegance, a symphony of systems and subsystems, auditory, ocular, olfactory, muscular, neural, reproductive, skeletal. Its very cells are tiny biological universes all by themselves. A guppy is small, so what? It's fleeting, so what? It's also a work of artistry and engineering of fantastic complexity. We think we know what simplicity is. We think we know what complexity is. We're wrong. We see complexity in the big, the beautiful, the fearsome. We see simplicity in the modest, the quiet, the drab. We saw monsters in the men who destroyed the World Trade Towers, agents of a global web of people possessed of diabolical cunning. But any fool can knock down a skyscraper. It takes a genius to build a skyscraper. We see what we think is chaotic simplicity in a Jackson Pollock painting and orderly complexity in a Botticelli. But Botticelli never set foot in the complex world of ever-repeating fractals that Pollock called his home. We think that a surgeon's job must be more complex than a psychologist's, except that surgeons manipulate tissue they can see and feel and hold in their hands. Psychologists have to intuit the ineffable workings of the human mind. Everywhere we turn, we see the complexity of the conundrum of simplicity. Let's consider something grander than the guppy, even more wondrous than the star. Let's consider the martini. Vodka, thank you very much, not gin. In a world of bartenders in which the greatest of the bartenders are equal parts artists, chefs, and chemists, the martini is an exercise in austerity. A martini can be shaken or stirred in a metal or glass container with sweet vermouth or dry vermouth. It can be served with olives or onions or a twist or nothing at all. That's it. And yet, when you multiply all of those variables times one another, determining how many different combinations of martinis so few X factors can produce, you come up with 6.9 quadrillion. You could serve every one of the 5 billion adults on the planet 1 million martinis each and never pour the same drink twice. We'll be doing that later, by the way. The reason we're so confounded by Simplexity is because we think that it, like so many other things, ought to live on a clean continuum. with simple things at the left and complex things at the right. But in fact, that continuum is more of an arc, anchored at both ends by simplicity with complexity at the peak. Consider an empty room, a room this size, pumped full of gas, made up of atoms representing all of the elements in the periodic table. The room is a very uninteresting place, but a very busy one, with the gas swirling and colliding in random eddies in all directions. That is the simplicity of chaos. Now take that same gas and condense it down to a cube about this big around. Chill it to close to absolute zero, the point at which nearly all molecular motion stops. That's the simplicity of robustness. Now, go back to the first end of that arc and begin climbing it as the atoms sort themselves into something organized and interesting, a car, a horse, a satellite, a guppy, catching themselves before they slide down the other side of the arc to something fixed and hard and lumpish. The Simplexity Arc governs all manner of systems. Let's consider traffic. A multi-lane highway at 3 a.m. with just a scattering of cars moving and weaving in all directions is the simplicity of chaos. The lockdown of rush hour traffic with nothing moving at all is the simplicity of robustness. It's somewhere in the middle hours with a great swarm of cars moving together, calculating speeds and dangers, ducking into gaps, that we find the real complexity of traffic. In fact, highway planners have reduced this idea to an equation determining that the greatest efficiency on any road is achieved when speeds range from 25 to 45 miles an hour and the number of cars moving past any given point are somewhere between 5,000 and 6,200. This is peak efficiency. Fewer cars and higher speeds, you move down to the chaos side. More cars and slower speeds, you move down to the robust side. Not everything in the Simplexity universe is so easily plotted on a graph. In some cases, it requires zooming in on something that seems simple, going closer and closer until you see its elegant internal machinery. Take, for instance, the handshake. It's the simplest and most retail of human transactions. We learn it early, we master it for life, and it's not exactly as if it takes much practice. A quick grip, a few shakes, and you've said hello. But think of what goes behind making that tiny exchange happen. The neural firings, the tactile feedback, the unerring spatial reasoning of two autonomous beings converging in the same spot, in the same moment, for the same shared ritual. Think, too, of the long history of human traditions that go behind the handshake, the semiotics of bows and waves and smiles, of hat tips from men and curtsies from girls, all conveying the same extraordinarily important premise: we come in peace, we mean no harm. The idea of hidden complexity in simple things follows us through to our careers. In general, we respect the work of corporate presidents and CEOs more than we do the complexity of the work of the people, the armies of people they employ. We shouldn't. Take, for instance, call center workers, those people who keep us on hold for 15 minutes and ask us questions about our mother's maiden name and the street we grew up on and the name of your first pet, and mine died 6 months after we got it, so I never remember the name to begin with. And yet they deserve more respect than we give them. According to a Cornell University study, the average call center worker has to field one call every 3 to 5 minutes, or 160 calls a day, if they work for an insurance company, they have to be familiar with dozens of policies. If they work for a consumer electronics company, they have to be familiar with hundreds of products. And no sooner are they done with one policy, one product, than they have to turn their attention to another every 3 to 5 minutes, 160 times a day. Could you do that? I couldn't do that. Up and down the job scale, we see this idea of the unexpected complexity of lower tier workers. The factory floor manager, whose organizational and interpersonal skills have to be much better than those of the board member who helps run the company. The ambulance driver or paramedic, who has to be better able to diagnose an injury or illness in the moment and on the fly, far better than, say, the chief of cardiac surgery who hasn't stepped into an operating room in years. The taxi drivers who know the streets of their city better than the transit chief ever could. Ultimately, it's the star in the guppy, over and over again, round and round. In the long run, understanding complexity, simplicity, and simplexity is a little bit like photography, a business of establishing aperture and focal length, knowing what to take into your frame and what to leave out of it. This idea of knowing where to look and where not to look may have been most powerfully captured in the work of a scientist most people haven't heard of, Karl Jansky, the early 19th century physicist. In 1931, when Jansky was a young man working for Bell Telephone Laboratories, just 26 years old, he was given the job of trying to understand the cause of the constant hiss and crackle that was forever plaguing overseas phone calls. The problem wasn't the cabling, they were well insulated. And the problem wasn't the telephone equipment itself, that worked perfectly in the lab. So Jansky looked at the sky. The atmosphere is a busy, energetic place, forever crackling with lightning and humming with the energy of radio broadcasts. But the interference on the phone cables was relatively steady, and atmospheric disturbances fluctuate depending on local conditions. So Jansky wisely looked higher still, into space, building a radio antenna on a rotating base and allowing it to survey the cosmos constantly, looking for the source or sources of the interference. And before long, he found it. Every 23 hours and 56 minutes, or about the time it takes the Earth to complete one rotation, the hiss on the line peaked. And it happened at the very moment the antenna was pointed to the constellation Sagittarius, which itself lies near the center or in the direction of the center of the galaxy. It was then Jansky realized the hiss on the phone line was the voice of the cosmos itself, the combined electromagnetic energy of every star, nebula, and galaxy in the universe. Prior to Jansky's discovery, scientists trying to study space were limited to doing it in the visual spectrum, a bit like standing a foot from a door and peering through the keyhole, trying to determine what's happening in the other room. Jansky kicked the door open and allowed the entire electromagnetic spectrum to pour in. Gamma rays, microwaves, X-rays, the ultraviolet, the infrared, and with that, the science of radio astronomy was born. Even now, decades later, as phone calls have improved, we can still hear Jansky's exquisite hiss in the background static of a poorly tuned radio station. The song may be the thing you want to hear. The static may be the thing you don't. But the true key to understanding Simplexity is appreciating the music in both. Thank you.